Everyone is all aware of the current financial crisis and the huge implications for the economy today. The question remains, how are we going to restructure the financial system? How are we going to change the financial markets to work better so we don't have another financial crisis? And that's kind of the underlying theme of my work. I'm primarily a monetary and financial historian, but since financial crises are rare events which happen perhaps every 10, 20 years, it's good to go back in time and compare what's happened today in previous episodes. So that's the primary focus of my work, and I can tell you a little bit about three different dimensions of that. The first of these is about comparing today's boom and crash in the real estate market with previous ones. There's a little-known boom in the 1920s. Surprisingly, it had the same rise in housing prices and the same drop as today, but without the same terrible implications. Why didn't that real estate market crash bring about a financial crisis as it did today? And so part of what that research is to look at each one of the explanatory factors which have been alleged today. Was the Fed too easy? Was there lax supervision? Was there predatory lending? To look at those and see if those occurred in the 1920s and to see what separates the two. What I find in this work is that while the boom was of the same magnitude, it didn't have the same impact, and the reasons are that federal policies were almost non-existent at the time. The two biggest differences between the 1920s and today are that the government today guarantees the deposits and liabilities of almost all financial institutions. These policies have allowed bank managers to take great risks. So we have this policy in place which does that, and now what we're trying to do is trying to control the risks, but underlying that is this policy of providing insurance to you and me and everyone else about insuring their deposits. How does that play out in the 1920s? Well, in the 1920s, you don't have this risk, so institutions are much more conservative. And therefore, when the housing market crashes, they're not bringing down the system. The other policy, which is different between the 1920s and today, is there was no federal housing policies. The names Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are part of a whole set of federal policies which encourage the growth of home ownership. Home ownership is a good thing, but it may not be the best policy for a lot of people who have low incomes. But what we've done is to encourage more and more people to take out long-term mortgages. This adds more risk to the financial institutions who offered them loans. That didn't happen in the 1920s. Home ownership was at a much lower level. More people rented, and therefore, when the housing market turned down, there wasn't as big a crisis. So these are the basic findings of this research. The second area of research is bank supervision. And it arises because when we put our deposits in the bank, the government says we're going to insure your deposits up to $250,000. And we don't pay much attention from that. Bank supervision is carried out by several federal agencies. These agencies' primary job is to make sure that banks aren't taking excessive risks. Congress has set up all these different agencies, but it has not carefully monitored them. And oftentimes they're not easy to compare. So the second line of my research is to provide a comprehensive evaluation for all these agencies. But the only way possibly do that in a rational way is to take a careful look at each of these agencies. And I have a team of 4 undergraduates who are busy collecting information on several agencies simultaneously. The third line of my research focuses on derivatives markets. One of the big questions today is how do you want to structure the derivatives markets? And my work on that actually goes further back in time than the previous research and focuses on France in the 19th century. They kept very exact records. This we don't have for any comparable period in the US or Great Britain. So what I've been doing with my French colleagues is putting together all this data and to examine what caused breakdowns in the market. This market looks very similar to derivatives markets today in that when you have derivatives, that is futures or options, which are traded on an exchange, that works generally very well. The exchanges, on the other hand, work well because we know that they're transparent. We can see through that. Big institutions aren't transparent. And that's the source of the current problems today. The important things we have to do is to make sure that we get as much of the derivatives market as is appropriate onto the exchanges where they can be transparent. We know this is a very important feature of the markets.